Since I was announced a few weeks ago that I'll be moving to a new assignment this summer in the Chicago area, I've received just so many gracious messages from you folks, and I really do appreciate it. And so often the message would be something like, we'll really miss you, but it'll be so good for you, to be closer to your family and your relatives. And I appreciate that thought. But I have to tell you, my family and my relatives are very upset that I'm leaving here and moving closer to them. And to be more accurate, they are upset that I'm not going to be living near the Augustinian Orders Lake House over on Baldwin Lake, which they love to come up and use, along with my rectory from time to time during the year. But I've assured them that we will continue, certainly at least, to have our annual family Thanksgiving gathering over there at the lake house. I've already got it reserved for this Thanksgiving, so that kind of quieted them down a little bit on Easter. But one of the things that we do over there, and I'm sure your families can identify with this too, especially on that Thanksgiving weekend when the relatives gather, we get something like 30 people crammed into the house over there in my rectory. One of the things we enjoy doing is at night, as it gets dark, and of course that time of year it's already cold outside, it usually is, we love to build a fire. And sometimes we build it down near the lake. We have a little kind of campfire area. Sometimes we build it up on the deck closer to the house that we have a little fire pit that we use. And of course, as you probably know the experience too, then we sit around the fire and laugh and tell stories, usually stories on each other, family stories, and so on, and just all kinds of different stories that we share. And it's a wonderful time. We go well into the night doing it. And of course, a little beer, I think, probably helps too. But I was thinking of that image of a family or a community of friends gathered around a fire at nights when it's cold and dark. And for sure, we all want to stay close to the fire because it's cold out there. And staying close to the fire keeps us warm. And in the warmth of that fire and in the light of that fire, we share stories of the family. And I think especially for maybe the younger members of the family, it's good for them to hear some of the stories of those who have gone before us or of some of us when we were younger. It kind of carries on and reinforces the notion of family among the relatives. I thought of that image, which many of you I'm sure can identify with, and I thought of that image as really describing what the church is meant to be. And there was a spiritual writer many years ago who I appreciated. He had a phrase that he used. He talked about the church and each parish of a church being like a center of values radiation. So think of a radiator or that fire giving off warmth. He describes the church as a center for values radiation. And I think that kind of lines up with that image of the campfire and the community gathered around it telling stories. The first reading today on this second Sunday of the church's long Easter season, that first reading gives us a summary of the early Christian community in Jerusalem after the resurrection. We're told that the disciples, a very small group at the time, really, they held all things in common. They didn't have such a thing as private property, really. But everything belonged to everyone. And they made sure they took care of everyone that way. They kind of put down their self-interests and served only the common good. And we're told that they gathered for prayer and that their numbers then continued to grow. Again, it was like in that very hostile environment of Jerusalem at the time, their community was a center of values radiation, as though there was a fire burning, the love of God, that attracted the disciples and warmed them as they told and retold the stories of Jesus and what it continued to mean to them. The gospel today, the traditional gospel on the second Sunday of the Easter season, shows us the story from John's gospel of the doubting Thomas. Poor Thomas, he goes down in history with that nickname, the doubting Thomas. He, in fact, is the first one to recognize Jesus as my Lord and my God, but we call him the doubting Thomas. We remember that especially. But there's a detail that I think is really intriguing, and it ties into this notion of the importance of gathering as a community around the fire of God's love. The first time the risen Jesus appears to the apostles, Thomas isn't with them. Where is he? We're not sure. We don't know. But we hear that he's really struggling with belief and disbelief. When the disciples catch up with him and say, the risen Jesus appeared to us. He's alive. He's skeptical, maybe even cynical by this point. I'll never believe that. Not until I really see the wounds. I won't believe it. But at least even with that doubt, even with maybe that skepticism or even cynicism, he continues to gather with the disciples, somehow around the fire of God's love, in that locked room. And he is there the second time. And it's in a sense that he allows the faith of that community, that very small community, to carry him, to hold him, even with his questions, even with his doubts. And finally, it's in the midst of that experience of being carried by this community that has gathered around the fire of God's love that Christ appears to him and that he personally accepts the risen Lord Christ as his Lord and Savior. Today, so many people, we hear it, you hear it, we hear it among family members, I hear it among my own family members. People say, well, I believe in God. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. We hear that a lot. I'm spiritual, I believe in God, but I don't go to church. I don't really want the church. Well, I think today this image of the church as a community gathered around the fire of God's love, sharing stories of that love, is an important image for us who find the church important. Because we know, just like at that campfire, if we wander away into the cold darkness, we might freeze. And so it's good to stay close. Even if it means, like Thomas, we need to be carried sometimes by the community because we have some doubts. We have skepticism. And so today, as we continue to celebrate the great joy, glory, and hope of Easter, we thank God for the gift of the church to us, what it is as that community of faith, hope, and charity gathered around the fire of God's love, sharing stories so that we reinforce within one another the meaning of our faith. It is more than providential that the most solemn liturgy of our Catholic Church, the Easter Vigil on Holy Saturday night, begins outside in the darkness, gathered around a fire. In fact, it's the fire pit that came from the Baldwin Lake House. And there we listen and accept Christ as our light, as we remember the stories of old of God our Savior, culminating in the resurrection of Jesus. May the warmth of God's love be there always for you, and may you and those you love always find a way to stay close to that fire of God's love and mercy.